This is Frank Rodriguez Villela, and I'm here really excited because I have a chance to talk to Edward Trybek, and it's really neat because I can't say I was responsible for his success, but I know I had him in my school for a bit at Performing Arts in Houston, Texas, and it was really a joy to really see him develop as a musician. We lost a little track while we were, I guess, about 20 years? We lost about 20 years. Almost,
yeah.
Probably 15 to 17 years that we didn't talk. But Edward's now, he's always been a great guitarist. And by the way, I'm going to tell you this thing. Yeah. I was talking to Andrew Sinowik, right?
Yeah.
And so he mentioned that you had done a particular job where I guess you had written or orchestrated, and then you came and played the part. As you played the particular part, you were explaining it, and he goes, "Man, why don't you do it?" So I'm going to see that Edward can do it. You know, I know our lives change. Things change in our lives. Things that we start as guitarists. I know I started as a young guitarist in Los Angeles. But Andrew said great things about you.
Wow.
So, and I know that's when it comes down to it, that's something we have passions for our instruments, or passion for the music that we do, or we start as a young musician. And it was so nice to know that you've done so well in Los Angeles as an orchestrator and writer and arranger.
Andrew's being very generous though, because his take 1 is like my take 5. So
Well, take 5 is not that good.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to present Mr. Edward Trybek, and I just wanted, this series of videos and interviews is really about people who start, obviously with the passion of playing guitar, learning music, and things change on the way for many people as far as directions that the guitar will take you. I always think a guitar is like a car. It takes you very many places. Because I started seeing you, I guess you were about 14 years old.
Yeah.
You were 14, and then so I really got to see you. I mean, I remember vividly certain times when we were in my rhythm section class. So I guess from 14 to 18 years old.
Yeah.
And then after that, that was just normal. After people leave high school, they usually don't come back. You're not supposed to. And so I just want to know, sort of what happened, prior, what got you to go into performing arts, and then after and how you felt about that, and then once you left, what did you start thinking about?
So I started playing guitar when I was about 10, somewhere in there. I asked my parents, I said, I want to play, and they said, okay, fine. And they had the wisdom to at least say, okay, well, what do you want to play? And I said, well, I want to play Pink Floyd and Jimi Hendrix and that kind of thing. So they're like, okay, fine, we'll get you lessons, but you also have to take classical. And I had no idea what classical guitar was, so I was like, okay, whatever, I don't know what that is. And so they got me started actually with 2 different teachers, so it was kind of good because I had both sides, and was working on both. And then in 8th grade, I was like, okay, I got to decide where I want to go to high school. And my mom was actually the one who sort of pushed. She said, you should audition for PVA. And I thought, none of my friends are going. And she just audition.
During middle school.
Yeah, and so in middle school. And so my electric guitar teacher at the time said, okay, well, let's work on some more bluesy stuff, more jazz, he taught me a couple walking bass, some things to be able to play at my audition that were jazz. And so actually for Doc at PVI, I actually played jazz, and I also played some classical stuff. Now, at the time, he scared the heck out of me because, you had to bring your music. I brought it, and he just said, okay, that was cool. He's like, all right, now improvise over it. And he sat down at the piano and started playing, and I was just completely I don't know what to do. So I think it just was like, okay, minor pentatonic, that's what I know, and so be it. And I was listening to jazz, but I wasn't that into jazz at the time, but I love listening to Joe Pass, and I still do. So that's sort of what led me into PVA once I got in. Then it was like, once it was like, okay, you're accepted, I was like, okay, I'm going there. I was like, so that kind of got me to go there. Then actually, part of my current situation is due to you, Frank, actually, because I didn't know, like I'd always had an interest in film music, but I did not know about the studio scene, like what it was. And so, very early on, I remember you were kind of telling us in the rhythm section class about what it was, and this is why you got to learn to read really well, and this and that. And so one thing I took away was that I needed to learn to sight read as best I could so I didn't have to practice. Because then if I could sight read really well, and of course that's obviously not the case, but the nice part is when you are able to read well, you are able to learn certain things faster. So that also helped me in terms of steering me towards wanting to come to LA and get into the studio scene, specifically for film. And so that you did actually have some influence on that, like planting the seed. And then of course, you were teaching us and giving us exercise and all those kinds of things to help develop those skills and, reading, improvisation, technique, all of that. So that was sort of the ongoing process through high school. And then I ended up coming out to LA to study at USC.
For its classical, right?
For classical guitar, I felt that I was better at that, rather than compared to jazz. So I came out here to study with Scott Tennant and Pepe Romero at USC, and when I got here, I immediately started asking around. I said, I want to study counterpoint orchestration. A number of people steered me towards the same person, so I'm studying with him, and then eventually working with him and helping him out on actual, film scoring gigs as, orchestrating and copying whatever needed to happen. And gradually one thing led to another, and suddenly people were like, oh, you can play guitar? Oh, okay, cool. And, that also led to more orchestration. In fact, I remember there was one time I got asked, I don't remember what it was, some movie or game or something, and I got asked to come in and I was like, hey, I need you to play some like nylon guitar stuff. I was like, okay, great. And, came in with a bunch of guitars, and the composer, had a little piece of printed out music, which straight out of Logic or something. It looked like crap, but he just said like, okay, can you play this? And he just, all right, 8 clicks and played it, and I read it and played it. And he just looked at me, he's like, you can actually read music? I can sight read it? I was like, well, that's my job, right? Like, isn't that what he wanted me to do? Yeah. So that took me by surprise, because apparently he'd had another, like a more legit flamenco guitarist come in, but the guy couldn't read at all. So he wasn't able to get what he wanted, because that's sort of the problem with media music. You'll have constantly changing time signatures. It's not necessarily, hey, listen to this. Okay, you got it? Cool. It's a groove. All these things can get broken and twisted. So
I always feel that's one of the things. I mean, and I also come across great flamenco players, great classical players. But then there's points where you gotta do this now.
Yeah.
You gotta do it now. But you can't take it home to practice. You gotta do it.
Yeah.
But that might have been at performing arts. I always thought I was giving y'all lots of music.
Oh, constantly.
Either out real books, but I almost remember writing silly little charts.
Oh, I remember lots of handwritten stuff. Yeah. Photocopies of handwritten charts.
Yeah. So it was fun for me, but you felt comfortable. Doing that.
Yeah, totally, and it led me to. I remember in high school, particularly, and then also in college, practicing sight reading. It was just like, grab a book of whatever violin music, try and read it.
Right.
So I would say as a guitarist, I'm a pretty good sight reader. If I was a violinist, I'd be mediocre.
That's funny how that works. The level of, because they do it.
They do it all the time. I think that part of it is whatever you do, you're going to get better at. So
you felt good at it, and you felt you could deliver like what the person wanted.
Yeah.
And do you feel like, was it just through stuff? Was there any particular books you used or anything in particular, or was just everything?
Oh man. I basically just tried to read everything I could. It was just like whatever was around me. It was just like, if somebody said, hey, you need to get this piece of, learn this, whatever, study by Percassi or something. I was like, okay. So you get a book of a Percassi etudes, and of course I'd be practicing that one, but I would read through everything in the book. Just to read, of course very slowly and poorly at first, but gradually better and better. And so it's like anytime you go, here's a collection of Bach, or here's a whatever collection of transcribed guitar solos. So it's like, okay, just read. Read. Right. And then the other one was the complication, which I really remember a lot in big band, which was, hey, play it up an octave.
Yes.
Always. And I was like, okay. And so you start doing that. And the other one was transposing, on the fly while reading. And we had to do a little bit of that at PVA. I don't think we did too much, thankfully. Sure. But then when I got to college and I was accompanying singers, then suddenly it was happening all the time, because they're like, I I know this is an E flat, but can we do it in F sharp? Sure, of course, happy to. So that taught me the other part of the business, which is always absolutely no problem.
It's you never say no.
Yeah,
never say no. Well, that's interesting because on the you have obviously you're as a guitarist you're here and you're working and did you see after a while you just wanted to do more of the writing, or how did that turn out?
Well, I was always interested in orchestrating, and
see, I didn't know that about.
Yeah, I mean, it was just always very interesting to me. Like I remember, 15 or 16, we were on a road trip to the Grand Canyon, and I was in the back seat reading an orchestration textbook.
Oh my gosh!
And my parents were like, "Stop reading." What are you going to say? Right. So I'm strange, I guess.
No. A good strange.
Yeah, so I was always interested in that side of things. So it sort of happened. They kind of both happened a little slightly organic. I don't know if organically, but just as I got some more orchestration work, that would lead to knowing people who suddenly need a guitarist. And so then I get some more studio work.
So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, and then
guitar and then
right, and then over the past number of years, it's just that the orchestration has gotten busier and busier. I started getting asked to conduct more, and like basically the amount that I had time to practice started diminishing, and therefore I got to a point where I was like, hey, man, you're call Andrew Sinwick, like he's going to come in and nail it, and I'm going to be fumbling around a little bit trying to get it right for you. So I ended up the guitar playing kind of has fallen off a little bit because the focus has shifted.
So was there a particular classical composer when you started doing the classical that you felt I love what he's doing, or I love that emotion?
Musically, I mean Bach is it's always like mind blowing. The problem I find with Bach is it's usually very unidiomatic, right? It's just like it never seems to lay well, ever, because we're always stealing. We're like, we'll steal from the lute at best, or we'll steal from the cello suite, or and you're like, well, that instrument is tuned in fifths, so it's a totally like what would have worked just fine on their instrument is just this finger bending twist.
Like the sonatas and partitas. Violin.
So, I mean, and they're great, but they can be, I think, way harder on the guitar than they would even have been. And they'd be challenging on the violin, but even harder in their own way.
Harder on guitar, right. So Bach would be one.
Yeah, I mean, definitely up there. Personally, I love a lot of the stuff that Tárrega did, simply because, it's sort of this expansion of like, okay, the guitar is much closer to its modern form in classical guitar, let's say, and utilizing all these techniques like tremolo and like here's multiple pieces that use this technique that kind of is a bit of a showstopper for people, but also just something that's like, oh, you got to practice it and just really internalize it, and then eventually you're like, okay, I'm not thinking about it; it happens.
Right. That's guitaristic. I mean, when I think of Tárrega, I think of somebody that's just like, oh man,
Yeah, it lays. It always makes sense under like, oh, this is what. Absolutely, that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Was there any like a live performer that you felt like
well, Pepe Romero. Like the first time I saw him, he's just one of those performers who I think similar to like Yo-Yo Ma. Like they come up on stage and they just exude love. Like it's just like love for their instrument, love for the music that they're going to share with you, love for the audience. It feels a little bit I don't know, new agey almost. They exude an aura of love, but they really do. There's something about them. And then on top of that, of course, just complete technical mastery of their instrument, right, and musical mastery. So it's one of the reasons for coming out here was I wanted to study with him, and by extension, the Los Angeles Guitar Quartet always wowed me, and I love them. Right. And so I was studying with Scott Tennant, who also wrote Pumping Nylon, which is a fabulous technique book, and Scott studied with Pepe. But so it was like
USC. Yeah. So how did you feel about the school? Just because that's some pretty world class.
Yeah. No. The school itself was great. Great education, and it was fantastic. As long as you're not dealing with the sports department, you're probably fine, I guess. The music school there, it's basically a conservatory. Yeah. To me, it was conservatory level. So it was really enjoyable.
As far as the instruction.
Yeah, the instruction and the lessons you got, and the caliber of teachers, and there's just a steady stream of master classes. In other disciplines even, where it's like, hey, you're going to go here. You have this general music performance class, and they're going to have some world class Baroque interpreter come in. And even though that may not have been my interest at the time, I learned something because it's something, you're talking to a master musician who has something to say.
Right. That's sort of crazy. I didn't know the quartet was from there.
Yeah, they are. And part of that stems out of, for classical guitar, right? There's relatively limited amount of chamber music compared to, say, other instruments, right? Like violin, it's just like you can go forever with whatever chamber.
The repertoire.
Yeah, versus guitar, it's like we're inherently limited. We're constantly stealing from other things. So, like guitar quartet, I mean, now there are more works written for guitar quartet or guitar duo or guitar trio, but there's a lot of arranging that needs to be done. But it's that. It's like even if somebody's studying to be a soloist, there's such a benefit to doing the chamber music and playing with other people, otherwise you're just sitting in a room by yourself, and it's like, well, there's a lot in music you miss out on.
Did you like Soar stuff? Any of the Soar pieces?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, studied a ton of Soar, and again, a composer who was since he was a guitarist, his music is very idiomatic. It's like it all makes sense. Stylistic, obviously, it's this classical sort of style, but same thing with Giuliani, right? Same sort of time period where it's just their music just really lays.
Right.
Even Legnani, who's has all these caprices that are really hard and challenging, but they make sense on the guitar. It's I guess kind of the equivalent of Paganini or something. It's like, well, it's hard, but it does make sense to a player who is a master of the instrument. They're like, of course, this is the fingering you should do.
And then here's the thing about those are tunings too. I mean, because he obviously that makes sense for us.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing. Did you do guitar when you started playing? Did you ever have to, especially when you started working as a guitarist here in Los Angeles, where you had to detune stuff?
Oh, all the time. Oh yeah, all the time. It's like constant. I mean, that was the big thing. Is you're either detuning the whole instrument or detuning specific strings as need be. And I remember when the first time I had to play a piece in drop D, probably was in high school, I think, some classical piece, and it messed me up. Trying to read it was just so mind-blowing and confusing, and then after you do it for a while, it's like, oh, okay, you just adapt.
You lock it in.
And I mean, there's, in the studio, I mean, this is the nice thing, you can drop in and out, you'll get to a part and you're like, that's not possible. But if the composer's like, but I really want those notes, you say, okay, I'll play this, we'll stop, I'll come in here, we'll punch in for this, and literally, change the tuning so that I can do whatever thing they need. And then you mix it together and edit it, and you're just like, oh wow, that sounds amazing. And this is never ask somebody to play that live.
Right.
And that depends, because then there are composers who are like, look, I wrote this, but make it work for your instrument. I want it. They're not tied to the notes. And other composers are very tied to their notes. So that's what I programmed, that's what I want. Mm-hmm. And then you have to figure out a solution for it. So.
That's the pressure. That's the pressure of, But I mean, I always told my kids, I said, you gotta be ready, you gotta be prepared. Yeah. That's a big part of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, if somebody says, hey, okay, I'm gonna write something that's if you're in the key of E or A, it's great, our instrument literally loves that key. And then they're like, well, I'm gonna, and then you play something for a brass player, they're like, well, we're putting this in B flat. And you're just like, oh, okay. So then that's where the detuning may be well, I'm gonna detune this string so that I can get that note very easily, and I'm not sacrificing other things for that.
Right. I mean, and it's sort of funny because you obviously come in from, performing arts where we're doing traditional jazz.
Yeah.
And then you go to a school like USC where it's traditional classical.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you just have to work and there's nothing traditional about it.
No.
It's lost.
No, but what's good is that then you're preparing yourself on all sides. I think that every player should study improvisation for sure, because certainly if you want to be in a studio setting, because that's part of what you will get asked to read, you will get asked to improvise. Somebody will say, hey, make something up in this style. And, it's if you can do something that's halfway convincing, then you'll get hired again. And if you can't, they'll be like, okay.
It's the balance, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's trying to become the most well-rounded musician you can, and obviously whatever strengths we have, you play to that strength. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think that a lot of the stuff, the improvisation and the traditional jazz we did, I've almost never been asked to play straight ahead jazz. It just doesn't seem to come up, which is fine. Probably if they're going to do that, they're going to go ask somebody who's a jazz specialist who, that's their livelihood and that's what they do all the time.
They're going to go to New York, probably.
Yeah, probably. But there's plenty of great jazzers out here in LA too. But it's just whatever they're going to ask, they're going to get somebody who's a specialist in it. And it's so I mean, for me as a guitarist, I got a lot more work when people wanted not even necessarily classical, but fingerstyle, anything fingerstyle, because that was something that I had. That these other players who may have been great, but they couldn't necessarily really do the fingerstyle particularly well.
Right.
So,
and I've heard that comment. I mean, I've heard comments from other studio guys who are great players, and they have great track work, a lot of artists from Adele to Taylor Swift. They've done all these gigs, but they've been mainly the rock or pop guitars.
Yeah.
And then when it came down to the fingerstyle, it was just not. So they gave that to Dean. Dean,
exactly. Yeah, let Dean do
it. So that happens. But I always feel it's so nice to be able to do both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, again, like just the more you can do, the wider your opportunities are, right? But
when did you come out? What year was it when you came out?
2000.
2000. So how was that for you? I mean, was there as far as because I came obviously a lot way before then, but when you did you feel there were still opportunities to play and to do things?
Yeah, there were. As a college student, it was like I was obviously teaching and playing. Played a lot of weddings.
Okay.
A lot of weddings.
Yeah. Here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, here in LA, and and I would actually, and then I'd call around, especially early on, and like try to just say, hey, do you want some background music in your restaurant? And be like, oh well, what do you charge? I'm like, give me dinner and $50, and I'll play for 2 hours. And they're like, okay, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And in fact, I remember one restaurant I had a regular gig. It was Saturday nights from 10:30 at night to 12:30, which to me was like, why on earth are you doing this? And it was in Hollywood, so it was like this late night Hollywood crowd who'd go to have dinner at this Italian restaurant after they presumably went and saw movies, right? So, and there were times it was completely dead, and there were times it was packed. It was crazy. But the funny thing is, tying it all together, there was like a bartender who like one day was just like, hey, did you play at a wedding in Point Dume like 3 years ago? And I was like, probably. It's like, I don't remember. And they're just like, oh yeah, because I was my friend, and I remember this guitarist, and I was like, I was like, well, it's probably me. I probably had more hair, or something. So
that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, well, so but were you able to work and feel that?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't doing much studio work. The only studio work I was doing at that point were like student films. Because that was the world that I was surrounded by, and the truth is breaking into the studio scene is very difficult. There's already a select number of people, and inherently if somebody's hiring somebody saying, hey, this is a big movie, it's like, well, they're going to try to call up the people that they have experience with or have a reputation for coming in and doing the job. They don't want to take a risk on somebody new.
I know, that's always
which is tough. But then gradually one thing leads to another, and hopefully it happens. But I can say for myself, it was 9 years before I was like, okay, I'm paying my rent with like orchestration and studio work, being out here. So it took a long time.
Yeah.
And then, gradually, I had to like phase off my teaching because I just didn't have time for it. Partly because the demands of studio work and this sort of recording are so, it's crazy. Somebody will call, like last week, sometimes somebody texted 6 in the evening, was like, hey, are you free tomorrow morning? I was like, oh, what do you need? And I was like, we need you to conduct a session. Okay. Hang on, let me check with my wife, It's like, can I go? Okay, great, yeah, sure.
So it's just a last minute.
Yeah, there's things like that happen, or there's just things like where, you suddenly just like, hey, you're booked solid for a week now. You're going to be in triple sessions for a week, and then nothing for a month.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's hard to, that definitely would be almost impossible to juggle with, let's say, a normal 9-to-5 job. And even a job where like somebody says, hey, you're teaching music at this school, that can be hard to maintain.
Yeah. So you have to cut it. So, but it's nice to get to the point where you feel, okay, I don't have to do this part anymore. This part, even though I love teaching and I love doing certain things, but then I had to stop. I had to stop being it. I was a performing arts for so long, but there was other things I was doing. My instruments, I was doing all those crazy little instruments that I make, and. But you got to make a decision, and then you got to say, okay, now my session work is doing good, my orchestrating is doing good, and you start to, and then you pass it on to the other. Same thing will happen to the studio guys.
Yeah.
As soon as there'll be and Andrew's doing really well. I'm gonna meet up with him this week sometime, and but it's just interesting because y'all, actually, is Andrew your age too? I guess so.
We're about the same age.
Yeah, because he
certainly looks a lot younger than me, but
there's certain people, and he might touch about it too. But there was just certain things that, he could have been my student at like performing arts,
Yeah.
and then, but he did get to be with Chris Young, Chris Young,
Oh, yeah.
guitarist.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's in Austin now.
Oh,
He's in
okay.
Austin, and so he goes, Chris Young, he was, man, he knew all those jazz tunes, and I think that's something that the school really, when y'all hit wherever y'all went, whatever school y'all went to, or wherever area you went, that was obviously a big deal. And I'm just saying, I'm going to ask you, did you feel the preparation there gave you a little jump on stuff? I know.
Oh, absolutely.
I know, because Andrew made it like, oh man, Chris could do these things, and everybody was just.
No, well, I mean, look,
Like, were you there when Chris Young was there?
No, I wasn't there when Chris Young was there, but I mean, I'm saying like all those preparations were definitely a leg up and helpful, and also frankly, being around so many other people who were good. Like when I was a freshman, Mike Moreno was a senior, and I mean that dude could. It's like. And of course, it's like, you come in and you're just like, oh my God, everybody plays like this. And I was like, well, no, okay. Because it was Mike Moreno and Robert Glasper were in the same year together.
Yeah. Kendrick
Scott, and oh my God, there were so many great players there at that time. And it was just... Walter Smith was, I think 1 year younger than them. And it was just, you come in and you're just like, what? These... it's like, they're not that much older than me. And they're just blistering. And they're just like, and, doing such cool stuff. And But on the other hand, it was great because suddenly I'm getting exposed to this music. Like, oh, have you heard this? Have you heard, this guy Kurt? Blah, blah, blah. Check out this CD. And, it's inspiring. I mean, it's a little horrifying, but it's also inspiring to be like, okay, I can practice and I can strive for that.
It's a good inspiration. I always feel like if, you go to a good university and you'll have cats that can really play well and you're mesmerized by how great they are. But when you see a kid, when you see your colleague, you go, oh man. Yeah. And so I know those schools, and they're not that many, but I think, Edward, when you went there, that was an incredible time.
Well, I think so.
They're in that, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
It was it must have been in the water,
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was a bit just, it meant I spent a lot of time, at home, woodshedding and
right.
working on it.
When we were talking a little bit about other things to do, other things like maybe other projects. Is there any projects that you see that you might be thinking you want to do?
I don't know.
It's sort of a loaded question because I know you're busy as it is.
Yeah. Well, it's also like there were things that I was pursuing more of that I'd love to, frankly, just get back into practicing more than I am now. Because it's like I was releasing some albums, like both solo and some chamber stuff, and playing concerts, and it's sort of depressing when somebody calls, hey, do you want to play on a concert? And it's like I'd be embarrassed to go do that right now. Like I can't dedicate the time that I would feel sufficiently comfortable performing in that way. Right. And sometimes you don't have that choice. Like it's the funny thing with studios where it's like, to me, it's both extremely high pressure and also relaxing at the same time.
Right.
Because, you have the microphone. The microphone doesn't lie. The red light goes on. You need to perform. But also, if you mess up, you're just like, can we do that again? And you fix it, And look, George Deering, right? Legendary player. Like, I know from talking to multiple engineers, one of the, aside from him being a beast of a player, what they just love is that, like, he'll come in and say, hey, by the way, don't take, this bar from the last take it from the previous take. Like, he'll come in and tell them, just like, don't, it's like he knows when he made a mistake and he's like, I did that better the previous time. Or like, make sure you don't use that take. Oh. And, at the time, they may not even hear it. Or they may be like, oh, it's fine. And then it's like, later on, somebody will be listening to it under a microscope and go, oh, wait, hang on, do we have that? And he's already told them what to, where to get it from.
So he already mapped it out.
Yeah, and I think that can help. And the other thing is, at least for guitar now, and especially in the pandemic kind of era, it's like you're recording by yourself. So that also alleviates that pressure versus the live performance where it's like, it's kind of the flip side of that coin is it's like you need to perform live, but also it's like if you make a mistake, most people aren't even going to notice. Unless you make it more of a mistake. And again, that's something that I learned more through playing with other people. And like at HFPV, I was like, the joy of improvisation. It was like, well, you can make mistakes constantly. It's like, how you get out of that wrong note can make it sound like, ooh, that was really cool, versus like, ooh, that was really bad. It's like there's sort of two sides of the same coin, and both have their pressures.
Right.
I'd love to get back into just spending time with the instrument and playing it, and writing a bit for it, but which is also they're kind of tied, it's like you sit there and you're practicing, and so suddenly you get like distracted. Oh, here's an idea. Suddenly, next thing you know, an hour later, you've been writing music down.
Right.
So I'd love to get back into that, but it's hard.
Yeah.
Nowadays, getting exposed to these things can be the thing that inspires you, and it's, in some ways, people have more opportunity for exposure to these things than ever, right? Because with the internet, with YouTube, it was like, I didn't have that in the 90s, and it was just like, it was literally like somebody had to tell you, hey, go check out this video, or hey, here, check this tape out. It's like you had to get a physical thing from someone else. And now, you can literally just type in whatever random thing you want, and something will come up, and, or like, go read some random thread with a bunch of people that you never would have had contact with before, and somebody says something, well, who's that? Like, oh, okay, cool.
It's a different world.
And the problem, of course, is that there's also a lot of noise, and it's like, so it can be very hard to find things because there's so many things calling for your attention as well. Double-edged sword, I guess. But when I think about like the number of online resources there are for, if somebody wants to learn guitar, you can effectively study, so to speak, or at least get inspiration and hear almost whoever you want online, and you couldn't have done that before. Okay, case in point, Scott Tennant, right? I could listen to his recordings. If I was lucky, maybe I would get that VHS copy of, Pumping Nylon to actually see him play. But now it's like I can go type in his name, Scott Tennant, in YouTube, and it'll come up, probably come up with a bunch of people, but, Scott Tennant guitar, and it's going to come up with a bunch of live performances of Scott. Some in studios, some in actual concerts, and I can see him play live anytime I want, right? And that was a resource that was never available, and that applies to jazz, rock, whatever you want,
Yeah. So when you came out there, that was still not available.
That still wasn't really a thing. It was like, the infancy of the internet. Like, it's starting to have some stuff, but the idea of streaming a video over the internet over a dial-up modem was like, no,
that wasn't going to happen.
So, that's something that's obviously more recent and is, I think, an amazing resource. When I think about 70s and 80s, it's like you hear about these guitar sessions, and there's like 5 guitarists. They're at a session, along with the rest of the band. And nowadays, you're just like, well, we're usually going to strike the guitar separate. They're going to come in at, it's like, we're literally, okay, we'll do the orchestra. And then like, all right, have the guitarist come in now. Literally have him show up 2 hours later to do his bit. Yeah. And so every now and then you do it all together, but that's more and more rare. But there's still the personal relationship, because it still ends up being like, oh, okay, it's like, the composer and the engineer or engineers and, orchestrators and whoever, and you're all there with the same, it is still connected in some way.
Do you feel like in your sessions with the orchestration that that connection, and then dealing with the guitars, or is he flying you a file, or do you still get to be...
Depends on the project. It's all over the map. There are times, and this is the least inspiring one, where it's like you orchestrate and you just like, here's a PDF, and you send it off into the ether, and then I literally have no contact. It's like, they're going to send files directly to the engineer or to the composer or to whoever, and I have nothing to do with it. I don't even get to hear it until here's the finished thing. It's like, oh, you worked on this, whatever, Mickey Mouse, and it was like, that got done completely separate, even from the rest of this other live session we did,
right.
And I hear the guitar now when I'm literally watching it with my daughter. And I'm just like, oh, hey, cool, Andrew sounded great,
Yeah, right. So, even the mixing part of it, you wouldn't be part of.
Frequently not, sometimes it depends. There are other times where it's much more involved, or somebody's like, hey, I want everybody in the room, and they want a collaboration where we're all chiming in and doing things. It's all over the map.
Yeah, it's probably like just like when people do their songwriting or song production.
Yeah.
Where less people is the best.
Let
the producer do it.
Yeah. Too many cooks in the kitchen could be a problem.
Yeah. So, but I was just wondering, since will you hire the guitarist, or do you?
No, it's usually the contractor or a composer will say, oh, specify somebody. Every now and then somebody says, hey, Ed, who do you think? Or what I actually find happens more as an orchestrator, the position I'm in, especially if I'm conducting, is someone will say, hey, we're looking at filling whatever this spot is, a concertmaster or something. I'm like, here's some options. Do you have a preference? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I get asked, sometimes I don't. Mm-hmm. Same thing, somebody might say, hey, we're looking for a guitarist. Do you have any preference between these 3 people? So it just depends. It's really all over.
Yeah, sort of crazy. So it definitely, from the 70s and 80s where there was all these people coming in. And I don't. I guess the here in besides USC there was, and we mentioned earlier, it's MIT now, but it was GIT then. So I guess there's people still coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, they come into the school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's always a steady stream of people coming in and wanting to break in, and unfortunately, just like in any part of the entertainment business, there's lots of people who want to come in and make it, and then unfortunately do or do not for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I can say for my own self, it's like it took me 9 years to get to the point where I was like, okay, I can really pay my own rent.
Right.
With this. And it was a struggle. It was a struggle even to get to the point of like being able to pay my rent as a teaching private lessons and doing gigs.
Right.
And
it was all in Los Angeles area. See, it's so crazy because it's like
definitely not the West Side. Couldn't afford that.
What's that? Oh,
I
West
definitely
Side.
couldn't afford the West Side.
West Side's something else, huh?
Yeah.
But I mean, I just think it's interesting because it's like and I've heard the same thing. It's like you get to a certain point and then you find and go, oh. It's just like a little breeding thing, because the time is paid off, or not the time, but the work you've done has paid off, and now you
and you had that bit of luck that also helped you. I personally believe it's like it's hard work, definitely, but there's also you still got to get that break. The problem is you never know what that break is, and I mean I know a number of people who said like, oh, I can't seem to get work, blah blah. And I was like, well, I remember on a student film you showed up an hour late. Or you flaked. Yeah. And I was just like, no offense, but it was like, that's still in my brain 20 years later.
Isn't that weird? It's just that it's like what would they say? It's you don't get a second chance to make your first impression.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. You don't.
And you go like, oh, I mean, and I remember things where I would meet certain producers, and they would meet me at a particular gig that I was maybe MDing for somebody.
Yeah.
And it was a horrible thing. And it was horrible, the sound was horrible, and then we get off stage laughing. And he probably remembers me just laughing. And he wouldn't call me for anything. I didn't really care, but I found, George Daring was doing the session. So it was going to be hard to knock that boy off anyway.
It's pretty hard to knock George Daring.
So he was doing it, but it was just the fact that, you say something, you do something, and it's just your professionalism.
Yeah. And you never know what it is. I mean, I can say for studios, it's amazing that it's like, if the session is at 10 a.m., it's like 10 a.m. is when we start. So like everybody is there early. And I remember when I was 18, I was interning at the Sony scoring stage for, and it was literally, I just had to sit in the back of the control room and like, take some people's names and answer a couple of phone calls. But I was there for a lot of big movies being recorded. And I just got to see, it's like, when somebody like John Williams came in, you could have started an hour early because everyone was there. Some of them are practicing, some of them are chatting with other people, but like, if you'd say, hey, we need to start now, everybody would have been like, ready to go. And part of that's, LA traffic, everybody's like, you gotta get there early, make sure, and so that was, again, it was eye-opening to see these people, the way they played and the way they sight read, but also just like the way they interacted with each other, the way they interact, and that in the studio setting, your job is to facilitate. Right? Like your job is to help somebody else come to whatever realization is, whether help a composer realize their music or to help an artist realize their creation or a producer, whatever it is, your job is to facilitate in whatever the best way you can, right? And sometimes people want your spin on things, and other times people are like, no, I want you to do what I want. And your job either way is to do it, ideally with a smile, right? And, have like basically, we're trapped in a windowless room together, and it was like this goes back to the relationship thing. It's like if you're going to spend all these hours with somebody else, you want it to be pleasant. You want it to be with somebody that you want to spend that time in a room together.
Right. So it's just getting along, doing the normal stuff, but you have to deliver.
Well, that's the thing.
Because you have to make sure it doesn't get to you where and I always know that there's times where people get upset. No, that was the other one. The other take I did was great.
Yeah.
And then so next thing you argue.
Yeah. No, and you can't look, it's excellence is assumed like in this business. Like it just is. It's like that's not enough. Actually, it's not enough to be a great player. Yeah. And again, it's like as you just said, somebody can say, "Oh, I really," it's like somebody. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like somebody will say, "Hey, we need that again." Somebody say, "Well, why?" It was a good take, and I was like, well, because we said we want another. Like, it's like whether it's the composer or the orchestrator, the engineer, for whatever reason, and your job as a player is to say, sure, Absolutely. Now you can say, like, is there, the question, the way I've heard it phrased most often is just like, it's like, okay, absolutely. Is there something we can do different?
Oh.
And it's like, because then at least you're guiding it, that's done in a more positive way as opposed to like, why? I was like, because maybe the person said, look, I played it really well. I played exactly what's on the page. It was in tune. It was in time. Like, everything was there. Why do you need it again? And maybe the reason is something completely like, you know what? Like, there was some little stage noise. Somebody dropped a pencil and we need that take again.
Yeah.
Or maybe because, the hard drive failed. Like, you never know what reason it is. Or maybe the composer just wasn't paying attention. And you're just like, you know what? Let's just get a safety take. Have them do it again. This way the person will be paying attention.
So you have to have this.
You have to go, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything I can do different?
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And people just say, no, we just need it again. All right.
So you have to be as friendly and as
collaborative.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be that sort of feeling. It's like you are there to facilitate this collaboration.
That's a rhythm section too.
Yeah.
That's how rhythm sections work. They're listening and they're like
interacting,
complimenting.
playing. Like, what are you doing? Okay,
Yeah.
how can we make each other sound better?
Right. So they do connect, and there's just that level of excellence, but I guess the ability to create a good product.
Yeah.
To create, and that's like it's to me it's always. But everything we're touching, even though we're talking about right now, it's with other people we've come to that point where we understand that at a certain time we were able to really. I'm not going to say call the shots, but we're able to say, this is, I think we need to go. I need to do this.
Yeah.
And musically, and I always feel, the more you know music and the more you know everything about, say, and not everybody's going to be great at all styles, but we're going to know sort of what we're good at. And then all of a sudden, to me, it's the musicianship that gives you the ability to pick.
Yeah.
Don't you think? Like
and experience that you can say like, oh, you can listen to this and be like, oh, you know what? This sounds like this thing that Esquivel did like this, and so like we need to tweak this in this way.
Yeah, we do it this way.
But this is also part of like knowing what is your place in the situation. Like if I'm conducting a session, there are times that my job is literally just like run the session, say 8 clicks to here, and that's it. And I need to stay out of the way of whoever's in the booth because they know what they want and they want to say it their way, and they do not want me to contribute. And the other times people are like, no, I'm hiring you to help get this across the finish line, and I'll pipe up if I need to say something.
Right.
And so then in that case, I'm being more proactive and making comments or suggestions like, hey, should we tweak this? Do you want this option or that? And that comes from, I think, both, let's say, musical education, not even in the sense of school, but just like educating yourself musically about different styles and different ways to perform and different, the different traits of different music or of instruments. But then also getting that experience of like, well, we've literally recorded this thing before in this way. Do you want it to sound like that, or do you want it to be something different?
Yeah. Having the those choices.
Yeah.
You have them here.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
You already have them there, and then. But if you go with somebody who's not prepared, or it's probably really talented, still very talented, but they have nothing to grab stuff from. Yeah.
Well, they don't have the wheelbarrow of experience to go.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here. Do you want number 53 or number 802? It's like if you don't have the technique to do it, then it's like you can have the best of intentions, but if you can't execute it, then it doesn't work. So again, it's that side of you need both, right? Right. Excellence is assumed.
That's true. Yeah. I like that. That's a good thing.
It's not. I wish I could take credit for it. But somebody else said it. But excellence is assumed.
But also, when I said that you don't get a second chance to make a first impression.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's really it's almost cities like this, and and this is not just LA. I mean, we're in LA right now, but New York. Even if you're a player in Nashville, you better make those.
Oh things. You better impress. Well, it's also that's the other thing that first impression people you get pigeonholed. People are like, oh, you do this, and it can be really hard to get out of that pigeonhole. I mean, composers deal with that where they're like, oh, you're the rom-com guy, or oh, you're the horror guy, or it's like, oh, you write, this lady writes really great dramas, and it's like, and the truth is they can probably write all of it. But they get pigeonholed, and it's like that's now where their career is being boxed into this thing. Maybe a boom. It can be a benefit or it can be a detriment. And it's like how you use it is what it's going to be.
You know, Van Halen was a perfect example. I mean, when people wanted that sound, we're going to call Van Halen.
Yeah.
Though there was 10,000 guys that were shredding just as good as Van Halen, but it was still Quincy Jones would come and had Eddie,
I want this.
Yeah, Eddie, come over here. We're doing this thing with Michael. You know, and at first I think he actually didn't believe it, but that's the thing. But I think he did well. Yeah. You know, at that level of playing and stuff. You know,
absolutely.
I know. My teacher hated the fact that I even because he was from Texas. He said, just don't play that BB King stuff. Oh, that BB King stuff.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, which sort of bothered me because BB King was a better musician than that.
Yeah,
it's just that's what he was known for. It was the little bending and feel. So I thought it was funny that the pigeonhole is tough. So either way, Edward, it's so nice to get to hang out with you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's a nice. You know, I'm so proud of you. Thank you, and it was so good to see you.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's like a reunion. It should have been long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. 20 years too long.
But we didn't know who you were. I didn't know you were here until
20 years ago. I probably wouldn't have anything to say.
Yeah, now you do.
Now I can't stop talking.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much for watching, and remember to click the bell, right, and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. So thank you very much. Thanks for checking it out.